Hi, how are you doing? My name is Andy Wrasman. This is part 3 in a 6-part series looking at the evidence for the Easter resurrection that does prove Jesus is God. And the first part was looking at the Bible as a reliable historical source. Once that's taken care of, you look at the text, at the scriptures, you see that Jesus claimed to be God. From there, we're on this part. We're looking at, did Jesus actually die? Was he actually buried? And was he raised? Of first importance, according to Paul, is that Christ died for sins, was buried, and raised, and all these according to the scriptures. But we want to look at this. Did he actually die? Can we know this for sure historically? Was he actually buried? I've heard it said that criminals that were crucified were oftentimes left up there on their cross to rot, so everyone coming into town could see this is what it looks like if you're going to be an insurrectionist against the Roman Empire. That is going to be your fate. Birds are going to be picking your flesh. So was he actually buried? I also heard that sometimes the criminals were taken down and thrown into a common grave. So there we go. How's that work out? How do we know he was actually buried? And then how do we know he was raised? How do we know there was an empty tomb that Sunday morning? Now, to really get to the fact that he's raised, you would want to go to part 4, which is witnesses of the resurrected Jesus. But this is part 3. We're looking at, did Jesus actually die? Was he actually buried? Was there an empty tomb? That's what we're going to be mostly looking at on the was raised part. So what we're going to do is consider ourselves today to be CSI Jerusalem. If you were on the scene in the first century, what would you have access to? Would you be able to investigate this claim? Was there a Jesus of Nazareth that actually died? Was he actually buried? Where was he actually buried? Could you find the tomb that he was buried in the first century? Would these be things you could access and to discern? Could you find his body if the resurrection was falsified in some way? So we're going to do that by looking at witnesses, right? Who would be the witnesses that you could talk to in the first century? Where would you go to find answers to such things? And we're going to look at the scriptures then and see what they say and ask ourselves, if we were in the first century receiving the text of the Gospels, could we look at that and then go through and verify these events based on what they have given us? And I would say the answer is yes, but we're going to dig into it. So, first thing, though, to ask, would there be someone in the first century who might actually want to investigate? If they wanted to investigate, could they? And then would they? And so there are people that might want to investigate. Maybe people that had known Jesus, heard Jesus talk. Oh, he died, he came back to life. Let's look into this. If you were a Roman, maybe even in the government, there's a bit of an uprising right now, a bit of an uproar about this guy supposedly coming back from the dead. Let me go look into this. Did this actually happen? Someone who would be a high-ranking member in Jewish society or within Roman society, they definitely could investigate. I'm sure there were people that could access key players like Pilate if they wanted to. And there's a good reason that they would, especially if you were a high upper echelon high priest in the Jewish community or member of the Sanhedrin within the Jewish community. Those would be people that would definitely want to investigate and to figure out, is this true or not true? If you're one of Jesus' disciples, you would also want to know this too. You would very much want to know this. Did he actually come back to life or not? So I think there would certainly be people that would do this. When you read Luke 1:1-4, what you will see is that he points out many people had gone through to make an orderly account of the things that had occurred with the life of Jesus of Nazareth. And Luke is saying, I'm just one of those many, and I've investigated this, and I've looked at it with people back at the beginning that would have seen and known what had occurred. So Luke's a person which has done that investigation. He says many others had done it as well. Luke's investigation happens to survive to us today. We have no surviving investigations from that time that would give any indication to the contrary to what Christians confess and believe today. So what would you want to investigate? you of course would want to look into his death, right? You would want to see why was he killed, who killed him, who was present, who saw this, who verified that he had died, how many witnesses were there to this. These are things you would look at first. Did he actually die? Now, a fun thing on this one, and this leads into who would want to investigate, all right? So the gospel accounts record that darkness fell over all the land for a 3-hour time span as Jesus hung on the cross. This darkness covering the land is confirmed by the words of Thallus, a Samaritan historian who wrote about 20 years after Jesus' death, as well as by the Greek historian Phlegon. Their accounts of the darkness are preserved by the 2nd and 3rd century historian Julius Africanus, who records both Thallus and Phlegon to confirm the same year and time of the darkness as the Gospels. Julius records that Thallus tried to explain the darkness as an eclipse of the sun, yet Julius doesn't buy this argument. Okay, so this would be Phlegon and this would be Thallus. Their words are actually being received to us by Julius Africanus, so not in Thallus and Phlegon's own writings. What we are getting is someone a couple centuries after Thallus and Phlegon quoting them, all right? And his work has survived to us. I don't think this would be too big of a problem. I've read many books in my lifetime in which a person is quoting someone from a couple centuries before, and when I get it, I don't question the validity of this, and historians don't question the validity of this, because they're likely thinking someone in Julius Africanus's time period would have been able to have access to Thallus and Phlegon, just as Julius Africanus would, and would be able to counter his writings if they were not accurate. So here's what Julius records. Julius says that Thallus says the Jews celebrate their Passover on the 14th day according to the moon, and the death of our Savior falls on the day before the Passover. But an eclipse of the sun can only take place when the moon comes under the sun. How then could an eclipse have occurred when the moon is directly opposite the sun? So he's saying based on, so this is, you're seeing that Jesus died at the Passover, right? Death of our Savior falls on the Passover. There was an eclipse at this time. Amazing. So that would be Thallus. He's basically questioning this whole thing. Concerning Phlegon's account, Jesus records, it's evident they did not know of any such events in previous years. So in no such years before had he ever heard of such an occurrence happening. Now here's a fun one. Now this would, going back to part 1, this type of stuff would be external evidence. So internally, the whole world goes dark while Jesus is on the cross. Externally, we see the same message. And so if you were going to investigate, if you found out that, yeah, this whole darkening, why did the world mysteriously go dark at this time when it seems to be an utter impossibility for the world to go dark at this time, based on the astronomical alignment of the sun and the moon at this moment? What's going on? You find out that this darkening coincides with the death of one of Jesus of Nazareth. Yeah, you're going to want to investigate that. There's more external evidence. This is from Chinese history. Summer, 4th month, on the day of Renwu, the imperial edict reads, Yin and Yang have mistakenly switched and the sun and moon were eclipsed. The sins of all the people are now on one man. The emperor proclaims pardon to all under heaven. The time of this eclipse recorded during the Han Dynasty is placed at 31 AD, and if the darkening of the sun occurred from noon to 3 p.m. in Jerusalem, that would correspond to be from 5 to 8 p.m. at the current capital of China at the time, Luoyang, explaining why the Chinese records claim not just a darkening of the sun, but also the moon. Wow, pretty amazing if you ask me. So this darkening is even recorded in Chinese history, and the interpretation that the emperor had of it was pretty interesting. Something really bad must have happened. The sins of the whole world must be on one person, was his explanation. All right, so who could be witnesses of his death? And at this point in time, I want to just have you pause this video, look these verses up yourself, and ask yourself, who could be witnesses of his death? And I'll just go and share some of these. I look at it and see there were crowds that were present when Jesus was sentenced to death. Jesus was taken to the praetorium, which is the governor's kind of house or headquarters, where there were Roman soldiers there. They were the ones that beat Jesus, flogged him. So any of them could have been there present. There were women disciples present. Simon of Cyrene was asked to carry Jesus' cross. You do have Pilate. You do have John the Apostle claiming to be there on the scene, seeing Jesus die. There's a good number of different witnesses. There's numerous women named, specifically named, having been there to witness the death of Jesus. Good number of witnesses are named, including the centurion is mentioned. He's not by name, but you could, in the first century, probably figure out, if you had the power and means in society, who was the centurion that was there. Definitely look these up. You want to see what the centurion says at Jesus' death. All right, so after we look at these witnesses, okay, so you have all these witnesses that you could access in the first century if you wanted to, if you had the power and the means, and they would be able to verify if Jesus did in fact die or not. And some of us may be laughing, do we even need to prove this or not? But yeah, really you do. There are Muslims that would say that Jesus never died on the cross, and so you need to show historically that he did. I've met numerous people, when they encounter this evidence, they want everything in their being to deny the fact that this is true, and so they end up making wild accusations. Well, couldn't someone have survived crucifixion? Is it possible he survived crucifixion, and that's why they thought he was raised from the dead? He never actually died to begin with. Well, let's throw in the fact that Jesus would then be lying to people, and he would still look completely, utterly bruised and battered and broken. But they will try, I mean, bruised and battered and broken to the extent that no one's going to be sitting going, hey, you're a resurrected Lord. You're doing so well. I'm going to follow you and give my own life to follow you. No, I mean, he's going to be so beaten and broken. He would have to be lying about it too. Hey guys, I came back to life. And it's like, dude, you sure still look like death to me. You don't just bounce back from a crucifixion in a couple days. So that's something that people will bring up. So as absurd some of you may think this is, it's worth looking at. So I have a video I'm gonna play for you. This is a medical doctor giving the medical evidence to address that question of, could someone survive a crucifixion? And this may be something then that someone in the first century may not have all the medical evidence behind it, but they certainly would be able to see a crucifixion and be able to walk away going, "That's you're not surviving that, buddy."
Yeah, I believe that Christ's suffering and the demonstration of the kind of physiologic stress that his human body was under is manifested in the Garden of Gethsemane, where it's described that he was sweating blood. And there is a well-documented medical condition in which patients who are under tremendous amount of emotional stress and physiological stress can in fact sweat blood, because little blood vessels within the glands burst and then the blood is expressed. The scourge involved the use of a short whip with pieces of typically metal, sometimes bone, sometimes pieces of porcelain wrapped in these leather straps, which is then utilized to come across typically the back, the shoulders, the legs of the victim. And the first few passes across a particular body part would tear through the skin, the fat, but eventually, once the outer layers were torn away, it would start getting in the muscle and the tendon. And of course, along the way, you're ripping through all the blood vessels that supply all those tissues. And so you're losing blood the whole time. The plant that was described actually had a very long thorn, not the little thorns that we would think from a rose bush. These were thorns that were typically 1.5 to 2 inches in length. The scalp is one of the most vascular portions of our bodies. It had a huge blood supply up there. So then having those thorns shoved down into the, down onto the bony plate would have gone through all the scalp, which in and of itself would have created a huge amount of blood loss. I've seen people actually bleed to death from just a scalp injury. So it's not a small injury to have, who knows, dozens of these things shoved into your scalp. And so that would have caused more blood loss. Typically when a victim has to carry the cross, what has been described in the literature, in actual Roman literature, is they describe they carry the crossbar, and the crossbar is estimated alone was estimated to weigh about 110 pounds. And of course, if your arms are stuck out here, wrapped up on the crossbar, and you fall down, you need help getting up. You just can't get up on your own because there's no possible way without your arms to get up. So he would have needed help getting up. If he fell over, there's a good chance that he could have hit his chest, which then could account for the possibility of a cardiac injury. Anatomically, we consider the wrists as part of the hand, and so with the placement of the nails between the radius and the ulna at that position, it still fits the definition of being in the hand, and it's in a position in which the nail won't rip out, which you have to have a solid point of fixation. Another interesting point about the placement of that is the median nerve goes right straight through that particular portion of the wrist, and so there would have been either destruction of the nerve or impingement of the nerve that would have created a tremendous amount of pain, so that every time you try to take a breath, it'd be agonizing. You'd be pushing down on spiked feet, which of course hurt, and then you'd be hanging on spiked arms. And so you alternate from excruciating pain to excruciating pain every time you take a breath. So even if he survives the actual crucifixion, he would have had to survive what I believe to be a lethal injury from the spear, just to find out whether he was alive or not. What's described is the loss of water and blood, and that would entail either pleural effusion or pericardial effusion, and the blood would have come from either pulmonary artery, pulmonary vein, the aorta or vena cava, or the heart itself. None of those injuries, unless you're treated immediately by a trauma surgeon like myself, with all the advanced equipment that we have, would be survivable after even a few minutes.
Well, did he really die? I guess we'll hear that.
Christ, as the Son of God, could have survived anything. He chose to manifest himself as a human at that point in time.
All right, so this is where his theology gets off a little bit. He didn't manifest himself as a human at the time. Jesus, once the incarnation, he's fully human all the time, even after his resurrection. I think what he's saying is he did not make use of his divine nature at this time. He allowed himself to suffer, which is in accordance with his human nature, not his divine nature.
And allowed himself to die.
Yeah, he allowed himself to die.
And being human at that point in time,
always
he
human,
could not have survived this particular series of traumas.
All right, there you go. Medical perspective. Jesus did not survive this, guys. He did not survive it. Now, the next step of the question is, was he actually buried? How would you know where his tomb is? And so Joseph of Arimathea is who buried Jesus. So if you want to know where Jesus' tomb is, you would find Joseph of Arimathea, or you would find someone that knows Joseph of Arimathea. All four Gospels record that Joseph is the one that buried Jesus' body. Matthew 27:57 says he was a rich man. Mark 15:43, Luke 23:50 say he was a member of the council or the Sanhedrin. Man, this is one I always need to remember. I think the Sanhedrin had 70 people plus the high priest, so 71 people, or it was just 70. So you get 70 Jewish leaders. These were the council. They made decisions. They were like the law. They were the people that decided that Jesus had committed blasphemy and deserved death. So they were the keepers of the Jewish law the best they could be underneath Roman rule. So Joseph of Arimathea was a member of this council. So already you know he's a rich man. You know he's from Arimathea. You know he's a member of the council. You cannot make a person up like this in the first century. If they were making up this individual, they would have been caught right off the bat. Now, I can't name all 100 senators in America. If someone wanted to try to pass off something for me, some senator from Colorado, I probably wouldn't catch me, right? But someone in Colorado would go, that's not our senator. Right? So there's no way you're going to make this up. Someone named Joseph Arimathea who's a member of the council. Someone in Arimathea is going to go, there's no one named Joseph on the council from there, and someone even on the council be like, dude, there's no one with that name. There's no one from that place on the council. It'd be like making up a senator today. You would eventually get caught very quickly. So the story would have collapsed on itself and wouldn't have even spread, because this very important fact of him needing to be buried in order to have this empty tomb would have already been disproven. Luke 23:51 says Joseph didn't agree with the vote to condemn Jesus, so that's why he was a member of the Sanhedrin and still there to bury Jesus. He didn't agree with the vote, and he's showing it by taking Jesus off the cross and burying him. John adds that Nicodemus was also a Sanhedrin member, helped Joseph bury Jesus. So Nicodemus is the teacher of the law that went to Jesus late at night in John chapter 3. So he was there also helping. So you can find one of them. Every gospel says that Joseph asked Pilate for the body and permission to bury it. And Mark says he did so with boldness. So Pilate would know if Jesus was dead, and if Pilate would know, yeah, I let this guy, someone came to me asking to take Jesus off the cross, and I gave him permission. Matthew 27:60 says the burial took place in Joseph's tomb. So maybe you don't even have to find Joseph Arimathea if you can find someone that can tell you where Joseph's family's tomb is. Mark 15:46, Luke 23:50 says that it was cut out of rock, so you're looking for a rock tomb. Luke 3:53, John 19:14 say no one had been laid in the tomb before. So if you find a bunch of other people laid in that tomb, you know, wrong tomb. John 19:41 says the tomb was in a garden near Golgotha, this place where Jesus was crucified. So it's a garden. So find out where Golgotha is, place of the skull. Find the garden nearby. Find the gardener. Where's Joseph's tomb? Right there. Yeah, lots of commotion. Lots of people have been looking at this thing lately. The gardener will be able to tell you this, okay? This is how it would work in history. Women disciples. They also followed Joseph and Nicodemus to the tomb. Two of them are named, Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of Joseph. So there you go. You have that there. So you could find those two women as well. When the burial was complete, a large stone was rolled in front of the tomb, sealing it shut. So we know that aspect of it. Going the wrong way. There we go. Can such details be fabricated in the first century without being ousted as lies? I would say no. Look at those extreme details. You're giving such extreme details, you will get caught in a lie. Your story will not continue. It will be disproven. It never was. Never has been. The next thing we're going to look at then is, was there an empty tomb on that Sunday morning? So, was the tomb empty? No. Trick question. What was there? There was the burial cloth there. So the burial cloth was left behind. It wouldn't make sense to steal a body and leave the burial cloth. Okay, that just does not make much sense. If you're going to steal something, you would steal the burial cloth and leave the body. The burial cloth could have potentially been worth something. Who would be good witnesses for the empty tomb? Check this out. You got the soldiers that were assigned there. We hear this story in Matthew. Matthew 27 records that the high priest and the other Jewish leaders went to Pilate and was actually saying, you know what, this man was saying he would come back to life from the dead, so you need to post some guards there to make sure he doesn't come back, to that his disciples don't try to steal the body, because if they were able to steal the body, then their second lie would end up being worse than the first lie. And so Pilate says, you have a guard. And so when he says you have a guard, some people look at that and go, he's referring to their temple guard. So, hey, you have a guard. But I also get it as like him just saying like, hey, you got it. You got it. You have a guard, man. Roman guard. You got it. Take it. So that's kind of how I understood it. And so I've kind of always thought it was Roman guards there. But because there's some debate, you don't necessarily need to say Roman guards. You could just say there were guards there. And then the likelihood of the disciples stealing the body, and if Jesus somehow did survive, we already saw that he didn't, him being able to roll away the stones and get away past the guards in his such weakened state, it isn't likely. Matthew 28 there records that the guards afterwards went to the Jewish leaders to basically get some help, I believe. If they were Roman guards, it makes complete sense that they went there, because they're like, dude, he got away, and we're dead men because of this. As Romans, if we fell in our duty as guards, we're dead. That's the penalty. We're dead. And so they were given a ton of money and told to hush up and to tell people that the disciples stole the body when they fell asleep. That's what they were told to do. So we got that story from Matthew. We don't have that anywhere else. So Matthew's telling us that from the very beginning, there was a circulating rumor that the disciples stole the body. And when we look at next week, we're going to see that it's not likely at all. I mean, it's already not likely that they would steal the body because they all ran away at Jesus' death. They didn't want to be crucified. So to beat up some guards, roll away a stone, steal a body, go about lying about it that they saw him back from the dead, it just doesn't add up for people that were scared for their lives and ran away when Jesus was arrested. So looking at the evidence, what do you think? If you were a first century investigator, is there enough witnesses you could look at, enough details that you could discern if the Gospels are telling truth or fact? I tell you what, I sure believe it's all true. Jesus died for sins, was buried, and rose from the dead for your salvation. And that is good news. That good news, received in faith, is what connects you into a right relationship with God and allows you to be a child of God. And so next week we're going to look at the witnesses, the people that actually saw him back from the dead. Because if all you have is an empty tomb, yeah, you could maybe still have a stolen body, or maybe if all you have is an empty tomb, maybe people went to the wrong tomb. But I think we've already seen the evidence that wouldn't have been happening in the first century. But most importantly, then, you have people that said they saw Jesus back from the dead. We're going to look at who those witnesses were and why we can trust their testimony to be true. All right, so tune in for part 4. God bless you all.